If you can do something like this, your work is obviously a bit more cut out for you. The talent is what's obvious, but the reasons why The Weeknd Works goes far beyond what we notice at a surface level. What does it take to throw a mattress into a crappy van at the age of 17 and do, as Abel would say, go from homeless to Forbes list? Let's find out. This is why The Weeknd Works. Today we'll be talking about Abel Tesfaye's character, The Weeknd, not to be confused with this band, which is actually why Abel dropped the E at the end of the name The Weeknd in the first place, to avoid any sort of copyright issues or confusion. But he changes his name in the specific way that he does, and it tells us much more than that. It's a small example, but it serves as the perfect start to explain why The Weeknd works. His name, after all, is our first impression of him, and a name of a character or brand works in more ways than one might think.
Presents the Weeknd Update.
The Weeknd Update.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Why are you here?
This has been the Weeknd Update.
This very small change, dropping the E, actually makes the icon that he is today all the more memorable. The change isn't just to make it different just for the sake of being different. It's actually a subtle lead to a character. The Weeknd is now a proper noun with different image associations that it gives off immediately. When something becomes weekend, it's very different than the escape one looks forward to after the arduous weekdays, the weekend. And it's going to become clearer and clearer that the name is apt for the music by which it stands. This is all very important for what Abel seems to have mastered in artistic foundations, one of the prominent reasons why The Weeknd Works. Spawning from his Ethiopian heritage, Abel's mother brought him up with the music that would later go on to inspire his musical palette, including the works of Starboy, Telehunja Sessi, and Mulatu Estetke. At first glance, the inspirations may not be super clear, but the parallels become undeniable as a further look into his holistic image prove that the artists of his upbringing have a huge say in The Weeknd today. We'll go more into this later, but let's start with how he effectively incorporates this cultural influence into his music and why this is effective for the reception of his image. It's about being specific. Cultural influence is the way one grounds their uniqueness within a familiarity. You can be way out there, but so that you don't appear abrasive to the ears or whatever art form you are being accepted with, your uniqueness is kept within the contained space of a familiar culture. The way one incorporates and samples their cultural influence into the music, similarly to a way that the American funk era does to an album like To Pimp a Butterfly, will determine the effectiveness of how cultural influence complements your style, like the way The Weeknd does with his aforementioned artists. Again, it's about how specific he is with the cultural influences that work to his advantage. It isn't just broadly, oh, I'll borrow some ideas of African music. No, it's only using the aesthetics and themes from his upbringing that are brought into the equation by virtue of which ones complement the style. Now, while the style can change for the trends or depending on what it can complement with The Weeknd, it's his vocal cords, the style can change with the times, the influence is forever. Abel began to find the depth of this and the character within his music as he experimented in his friend's makeshift studios for his first songs.
So
the questions be way longer like that. Yeah, keep going.
This leads us to another key point about his artistic foundation, his nearly costless start on YouTube. On February 24th, 2011, Tesfaye uploaded the songs What You Need, Loft Music, and The Morning to YouTube under the username Yeah. And the character of The Weeknd was thusly born into the eye of the public. As we see by his audience engagement to this day on YouTube, it's clear that The Weeknd has executed another technique that's proven essential to an artist's career. It's one thing to have your art be something that resonates with people in general, but taking that to a much more lucrative level is being able to have a target audience that returns to your music. If we take a look at why people love returning to his art, it's clear that his audience reflects the same kind of baser instincts that are presented within the journey of The Weeknd's music, and none of these struggles go without the pairing of a keen awareness of who is actually listening.
There are only two artists that I know saved my life, that made me made me the mind I am. That's Kurt Cobain and The Weeknd. He had his mixtapes. There were mixtapes. There was House of Balloons, there was Thursday, and there was Echoes of Silence. This is music I was listening to get outside of my mind. This is music I was listening to help me. And the subject matter is a bit different, but the energy behind it was real.
Yeah, I remember listening to like some of the songs on there, and I was like, it feels like it was detached. Like he was singing about like being kind of almost emotionless, especially like dealing with women. You know what I mean? Like
it was contradictory.
He didn't care. You know what I mean?
It was contradictory, but it was numbing.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the good thing about it.
Okay.
It kept everything quiet. It made you be okay with like being in the room by yourself.
The character of The Weeknd broken down has a super objective, if you will, of needing a home. Now this strikes musical gold for The Weeknd as it tends to the target audience in the way he wants to, in a manner that fits many social circumstances on a broad scale, but also comes in the quiet times of one's own privacy when one prefers it as an escape to the echoes of silence. Desiring safe home in the music all speaks to the idea of why the silence seemingly echoes, this album being an attempt to fill that void of silence, and at times ascribe to it the due fear we as humans actually have for it. After all, in silence, one's true thoughts and acknowledgements about the reality they reside in begin to come to the forefront. What follows the incorporations of thematic elements that attract an audience is knowing what they want without coming off as pandering to what you perceive their desires to be. How do you tread this fine line? Well, especially when it comes to the aforementioned themes of primal desires being brought into one's music. With the case of The Weeknd, oftentimes if you strip down what is said and bring it into the vacuum of a modern social context, it might come off as too offensive or raunchy. However, in order to maintain this edge without coming off as abrasive is to mask it in a way, a compensational balance that artists employ via their talent in vocals, lyricism, or production. It all depends on the atmosphere in which you use these mediums in order to set the rules of the playing ground, so to speak. Artists like Eminem do it with their lyricism, your favorite mumble rappers do it with production, And The Weeknd, over the course of his discography, has mastered the way of treading this line with his talent in his vocals, but we can't underestimate the importance of lyricism in this equation as well. The lyrics here aren't merely said in a vacuum, and the context of which will become clearer as we begin to get a closer look at The Weeknd's approach to lyricism.
You gon' make me show all the pain that you feel. You can tell that we ain't making no love, but I'll pretend, oh girl, I'll pretend.
For The Weeknd, the way his struggles reflect in his music is an offering, a pair of open, drugged-out arms, if you will, for which one can feel safe within the somberness, all while his music is wrestling with themes of home and escape. Why he names his music the way he does becomes more clear. It speaks to a baser instinct within all of us of those needs to feel safe no matter the circumstances that are thusly presented in the story that The Weeknd does. That's where his uniqueness comes in. His story is in fact unique to him, but the baser instincts and themes to which it speaks is all part of the culture by which it holds and speaks to in all of us. If we break down the character of The Weeknd, we find a layered individual where, just as is reflected in his music, the unforgiving loudness and party elements that sucks in the crowd has much more lying underneath the surface.
20 racks of table come from ebony. Cut that ever into skinny pieces. Then she clean up with her face, but I love my baby. You talking money, need a hearing aid. You talking about me, I don't see a shade. Switch on my side, like to get any lane. Switch on my core if I kill any pain.
Clearly, sexuality and the idea of risk and approach couldn't be more overt, but it wouldn't leave a fan of The Weeknd with the impression of, yeah, this guy likes sex a lot, I guess. No, it's one of the many outlets he uses within the safe space he's created within the art. The atmosphere formed by the production of his music creates this spacey, somber, yet safe place in which the most raunchy or sexy of lyrics can be expressed in a way that wouldn't be met with the typical judgment that you'd see in a modern social context. Thus, this is a special place where the Overton window is moved and the new rules of the playing ground are set for new things to be said, no matter how dangerous. Music that pushes the boundaries like this can arguably be why music and art is there in the first place, as many primal instincts and desires are met in these sorts of trains of thoughts do exist, but will be tempered or hindered typically in a social context in which many things we feel as humans don't really get to be addressed or discussed unless a space like this is made for those thoughts to really thrive without hindering or limitations. It is just art, after all. Much of his audience can find solace in this, as nothing too risky, sexy, or normally guilt-garnering can cross the line in this safe home of numbed-out ethereal escape, where the feeling of being at home with a woman or the perceived safety of being under the influence can all be carried through in his music, are all part of the dangerous strides he can take in his art without repercussion. The contrasting nature of the safe risk gives nothing too risky to be able to break the rules. In a way, it sets up complete themes of autonomy and freedom of thought, and gives his audience what he feels he never had: a home. The presentation of his encounters with women also worked to his favor in this regard, as we're often painted the picture of an unsuspecting woman with all her grace and yet innocuous nature, and then The Weeknd coming in with this sort of West Side Story, let me show you the life type of archetypal encounter. The seeming bad boy cliche that The Weeknd exemplifies isn't just there to regurgitate the story of bad men you've heard before. It's about the very present fears and the way he compensates for them that leads him to taking on these macabre endeavors that we just can't turn our ears from. The bad boy Weeknd represents a compensation of what he presents to be his fears. This bottom layer of fear and love is a potent part of how The Weeknd communicates to his audience. It stems from the presentation of his fatherless upbringing, the result of a broken home with a mixed relationship with his mother, whom he drove away from in a crappy van at the age of 17. The compensation for the heartbreak with his character, The Weeknd, who finally has control in these fantasies. The man who never had to worry about the repercussions of pain or love because he forever avoided it in the indulgence of dominant yet empty sex, the assumption of power and the numb escape coming from the drugs, hugs and kisses, ecstasy and oxy, XO. I point out the intricacies of this to show the importance of having all roads lead to Rome. Most everything presented in the art serves a purpose as it pertains to communicating a story to the audience who can relate. The relationship between his music and his merchandisable symbolism leads us to our final point. The music that makes the brand that is The Weeknd so unique is captured in a visual setting, a symbol. No matter how conscious we are of it, the audience has a feeling of returning to this particular setting every time we listen to his music, which from a marketing standpoint masters the necessary technique of making a home within one's brand. A brand is only as good as its breadth of network, and much of Abel's financial success can be attributed to the way and attitude in which he approaches others in the industry, much of which we can see far before he ever attained the reach he has now.
Listen, Joey Styles killed it. Big inspiration right here, baby. You already know what it is. He's gonna blow.
We're all family, man. Family matters, you know?
His attitude toward peers in the industry has rather consistently been one of wanting to serve others, even when it's seemingly competition. As Drake would say, I could never have a Virgil in my circle and hold him back because he makes me nervous. I want to see my brothers flourish to the higher purpose. Speaking of Drizzy himself, Abel's start on YouTube was catapulted upon being noticed and shouted out by Drake, a crucial luck of the draw moment that one practically requires for reaching high levels of success in the industry. But it would be intellectually dishonest to say that these moments come solely due to luck, as many would like to believe. It is imperative to give yourself the opportunity to get lucky. It wouldn't have come in this case without Abel's own entrepreneurial endeavors and attitudes. Though things fell through with Drake with Abel's decision to not sign to the OVO label, Abel said there wasn't any bad blood and that he let Drake know from day one, I wasn't going that route. I was going my own route, and he supported me. And I don't think this goes without entrepreneurial tactic. Though we've seen how his attitude toward the industry begets support to and from others, Abel still makes it clear that he carves his own path, and though this leads to moves like not signing with one of the most successful rap labels of all time in its prime, it does lead him to having a more managerial role over his career, and the subsequent advantage of having a much larger say over the reception of his image. The reception of his image being what is his relationship to the spotlight? How does he manage his media time? And now for the bulk of his career, he kept himself out of the spotlight. We live in an era where everything is so excessive. I think it's refreshing for everybody to be like, who the culture is this guy, Tesfaye says. I think that's why my career is going to be so long, because I haven't given people everything. There's a lot of truth to this sentiment in regards to career longevity. The air of mystery certainly works to his advantage here, and as we've seen by headlines unfolding for just under the last decade, it doesn't look like his relationship to the spotlight is going to slow down anytime soon, so long as there's progression on the side of artistry. What carries that? The managerial choices and risks he makes about his brand. The label has a way of reinventing itself for the ever-changing pop and R&B trends, the additions of artists like Nav and 88 Glam, being edgy but not to the extent that it becomes a parody of itself, and being widely accessible yet not uncontroversial. It's found its niche. As he continues to grow, hit after hit, it's clear that Abel's effectiveness in branding, retention of target audience, and artistic foundation are all chief reasons why The Weeknd works. And hopefully, you will too.